So your idea is that the Sphinx and maybe some aspects of the pyramid were much earlier,
Yes.
and why that's important is in that case it would be evidence of some transfer of technology
Yes.
from a much older civilization.
Yeah.
The idea is that during the Younger Dryas, most of that civilization was either destroyed or damaged, and they desperately scattered across the globe,
Seeking refuge
and telling stories of maybe the importance of the stars,
Mm-hmm.
their knowledge about the stars,
Yeah.
and their knowledge about building and knowledge about navigation.
Mm-hmm. That's roughly the idea. So it's interesting that the ancient Egyptians have a notion of an epoch that they call Zeptepi, which is the first time. It means the first time. This is when the gods walked the earth. This is when 7 sages brought wisdom to ancient Egypt. And that is seen as the origin of ancient Egyptian civilization. There are king lists by the ancient Egyptians themselves. There are king lists that go back way beyond the first dynasty, go back 30,000 years into the past in ancient Egypt, considered to be entirely mythical by Egyptologists. But nevertheless, it's interesting that there's that reference to remote time. Now, what you also have in Egypt are what might almost be described as secret societies. The Followers of Horus are one of those, specifically tasked with bringing forward the knowledge from the first time into later periods. The Souls of Pe and Neken are another one of these mysterious secret society groups who are possessors of knowledge that they transmit to the future. And what I'm broadly suggesting is that those survivors of the Younger Dryas cataclysm who settled in Giza may have been relatively small in number. It's interesting that they are referred to in the Edfu building text as 7 sages, because that repeats again and again. It's also in Mesopotamia. It's 7 sages, 7 Apkallu, who come out of the waters of the Persian Gulf and teach people all the skills of agriculture and of architecture and of astronomy. It's found all around the world that there was a relatively small number of people who took refuge in Giza, who benefited from the survival skills of the hunter-foragers who lived at Giza at that time, and who also passed on their knowledge to those hunter-foragers. But it was not knowledge that was ready to be put into shape at that time. And that knowledge was then preserved and kept and handled within very secretive groups that passed it down over thousands of years. And finally, it bursts into full form in the 4th dynasty in ancient Egypt. And you know, the notion that knowledge might be transferred over thousands of years shouldn't be absurd. We know, for example, in the case of ancient Israel, it goes back to the time of Abraham, which is pretty much, I think, around 2000 BC, and knowledge has been preserved from that time right up to the present day. So if you can preserve knowledge for 4,000 years, you can probably preserve it for 8.
Now, of course, the error bars on this are quite large, but if an advanced Ice Age civilization existed, where do you think it was? Where do you think we might find it one day if it existed? And how big do you think it might have been?
Well, this is where I'm often accused of presenting a God of the gaps argument, that I think there was a lost civilization because there's lots of the earth that archaeologists have never looked at. Of course, I'm not thinking that. These are very special gaps that I'm interested in. And I'm interested in them because of all the curiosities and the puzzlement that I've expressed to you before. It's not just because there are gaps in the archaeological record. It's because those gaps involve places that were very interesting places to live during the Ice Age. And they specifically include the Sahara Desert, which was not a desert during the Ice Age and went through this warm, wet period when it was very, very fertile. Certainly some archaeology has been done in the Sahara, but it's fractional. It's tiny. And I think if we want to get into the origins, true origins of ancient Egyptian civilization, of the peoples of ancient Egypt, we need to be looking in the Sahara for that. The Amazon rainforest is another example of this. I think the Sahara is about 9 million square kilometers. The Amazon that's left under dense canopy rainforest is about 5 million square kilometers, maybe closer to 6. And then you have the continental shelves that were submerged by sea level rise at the end of the Ice Age. Now, it's well established that sea level rose by 400 feet, but it didn't rise by 400 feet overnight. It came in dribs and drabs. There were periods of very rapid, quite significant sea level rise, and there were periods when the sea level was rising much more slowly. So that 400-foot sea level rise is spread out over a period of about 10,000 years, but there are episodes within it, like Meltwater Pulse 1b, like Meltwater Pulse 1a, when the flooding was really immense.
How big do you think it might have been? And do you think it was spread across the globe? So if there were expert navigators, do you think they spread across the globe?
Well, the reason that I'm talking about the gaps is I don't know where this civilization started or where it was based. All I'm seeing are clues and mysteries and puzzles that intrigue me and which suggest to me that something is missing from our past. And I'm not inclined to look for that missing something in, for example, Northern Europe, because Northern Europe was not a very nice place to live during the Ice Age. I mean, nobody smart would build a civilization in Northern Europe 12,000 years ago. It was a hideous, frozen wasteland. The places to look are places that were hospitable and welcoming to human beings during the Ice Age. And that, of course, includes the coastlines that are now underwater. Of course, it includes the Sahara Desert. And, of course, it includes the Amazon rainforest as well. All of these places, I think, are candidates for, quote unquote, my lost civilization. And because I think, largely from those ancient maps, that it was a navigating, seafaring civilization, I suspect that it wasn't only in one place. It was probably in a number of places. And then I can only speculate. Maybe there was a cultural value where it was felt that it was not appropriate to interfere with the lives of hunter-foragers at that time. Maybe it was felt that they should keep their distance from them. Just as even today, there is a feeling that we shouldn't be interfering too much with the uncontacted tribes in the Amazon rainforest. Although, interestingly, some of those tribes are now using cell phones. Yeah. That possibility may have been there in the past, and only when we come to a global cataclysm does it become essential to have outreach and actually to take refuge amongst those hunter-forager populations. That is the hypothesis that I'm putting forward. I'm not claiming that it's a fact, but for me, it helps to explain the evidence.
So that speaks to one of the challenges that archaeologists provide to this idea, is that there is a lot of evidence of humans in the Ice Age, and they appear to be all hunter-gatherers. But like you said, only a small percent of areas where humans have lived have been studied by archaeologists.
That's right. Very tiny percent. And even a tiny percent of every archaeological site has been studied by archaeologists too. Typically 1 to 5% of any archaeological site is excavated.
I mean, that's why Göbekli Tepe fills my mind with imagination, especially seeing it as a time capsule. You know, it's almost certain that there is places on Earth we haven't discovered that once we do, even if it's after the Ice Age, will change our view of human history. Yeah. Do you think there's going to be a place, like what would be your dream thing to discover, like Göbekli Tepe, that says a definitive like perturbation to our understanding of Ice Age history?
Some kind of archive, some kind of hall of records. There's both mystical associations with the hall of records at Giza from people like the Edgar Cayce organization. There's also ancient Egyptian traditions which suggest that something was concealed beneath the Sphinx. This is not an idea that is alien to ancient Egypt. It's quite present in ancient Egypt. So far as I know, nobody has dug down beneath the Sphinx. And of course, there's very good reasons for that. You don't want to damage the place too much. But let's call it the Hall of Records. I'd love to find that. But I think in a way, that's what Göbekli Tepe is. Göbekli Tepe is a Hall of Records. You know, it's interesting that just as I've tried to outline, I hope reasonably clearly, that the three great pyramids of Giza match Orion's belt in 10,500 BC, just as the Sphinx matches Leo in 10,500 BC, 12,500 years ago or so. Pillar 43 in Enclosure D at Göbekli Tepe contains what a number of researchers, myself included, regard as an astronomical diagram. Martin Sweatman of Edinburgh University is brought forward the best work in this field, but it was initially started by a gentleman called Paul Burley, who noticed that one of the figures on Pillar 43 is a scorpion, very much like we represent the constellation of Scorpio today, and that above it is a vulture with outstretched wings, which is in a posture very similar to the constellation that we call Sagittarius. And on that outstretched wing is a circular object. And the suggestion is that it's marking the time when the sun was at the center of the dark rift in the Milky Way at the summer solstice 12,500 years ago. That's what it's marking. And it's interesting that the same date can be deduced from Pillar 40. Of course, it's controversial. Martin Sweatman's ideas are by no means accepted by archaeology, but he's done very, very thorough, detailed statistical work on this, and I'm personally convinced. So we have a time capsule at Göbekli Tepe, which is memorializing a date that is at least 1,200 years before Göbekli Tepe was built. If that dating of 11,600 years ago proves to be absolutely the oldest date, as it is at present. The date memorialized on Pillar 43 is 12,800 years ago, the beginning of the Younger Dryas, the beginning of the impact event. And then Giza does the same thing, but in much larger scale. It uses massive megalithic architecture, which is very difficult to destroy, and a profound knowledge of astronomy to encode a date in a language that any culture which is sufficiently literate in astronomy will be able to decode. We don't have to have a script that we can't read, like we do with the Indus Valley civilization or with the Easter Island script. We don't have to have a script that can't be interpreted. If you use astronomical language, then any astronomical literate civilization will be able to give you a date. The Hoover Dam has a star map built into it, and that star map is part of an exhibition that was put there at the founding of the Hoover Dam. And what it does is it freezes the sky above the Hoover Dam at the moment of its completion. And Oscar Hansen, the artist who created that piece, said so specifically that this would be so that any future culture would be able to know the time of the dam's construction. So you can use astronomy and architecture to memorialize a particular date.
Quick pause. Bathroom break?
Sounds good.
So to me, the story that we've been talking about, it is both exciting if the mainstream archaeology narrative is correct,
Mm-hmm.
and the one you're constructing is correct. Both
Mm-hmm.
are super interesting because the mainstream archaeology perspective means that there's something about the human mind from which the pyramids, these ideas spring naturally. You place
Mm-hmm.
humans anywhere, you place them on Mars, it's
Yeah.
going to come out that way.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting story of human psychology that
Mm-hmm.
then becomes even more interesting when you evolve out of Africa with Homo sapiens, how they think about the world. That's super
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
And then if there's an ancient civilization, advanced civilization that explains why there's so many similar types of ideas that spread, that means that there's so much undiscovered still about the sort of the spring of these ideas of civilization that come. So to me, they're both fascinating. So I don't know why there's so much sort of infighting, but
I think it's partly territorial. I think that I can't speak of all archaeologists, but some archaeologists feel very territorial about their profession, and they do not feel happy about outsiders entering their realm, especially if those outsiders have a large platform. And I've found that the attacks on me by archaeologists have increased step by step with the increase of my exposure. I wasn't very interesting to them when I just had one minor bestseller in 1992 with a book called The Sign and the Seal. But when Fingerprints of the Gods was published in 1995 and became a global bestseller, then I started to attract their attention and appear to have been regarded as a threat to them. And that is the case today. That is why Ancient Apocalypse Season 1 was defined as the most dangerous show on Netflix. It's why the Society for American Archaeology wrote an open letter to Netflix asking Netflix to reclassify the series as science fiction. It's why they accused the series of anti-Semitism, misogyny, white supremacism, and a whole bunch of other things like that. It had nothing to do with anything that's in the series. It was like, we must shut this down. This is so dangerous to us. It's certainly not a danger. There are many more dangerous things in the world than a television series going on right now. But maybe it was seen as a danger to archaeology, that this non-archaeologist was in archaeological terrain and being viewed and seen by read by large numbers of people. Maybe that was part of the problem. And human nature being what it is, I noticed that two of my principal critics, John Hoops from the University of Kansas and Flint Dibble, who's now teaching at the University of Cardiff in Wales in the UK, are both people who like to have media exposure. And John Hoops has just recently started a YouTube channel. Flint Dibble has had one for quite a while, pretty small number of followers. I think that they feel that they should be the ones who are getting the global attention, and that it's not right that I am, and that the best way to stop that is to stop me, to shut me down, to get me cancelled, and basically requiring Netflix to relabel my series from a documentary to a science fiction, which is what they actually had the temerity to suggest to Netflix. That would, if that had gone through, if Netflix had listened to them, that would have effectively been the cancellation of my documentary series. It would no longer have been ranked under documentary. So it was a deliberate attempt to shut me down, and I see that going on again and again, and it's so unfortunate and so unnecessary. I've become very defensive towards archaeology. I hit back after 30 years of these attacks on my work. I'm tired of it, and I do defend myself, and sometimes I'm perhaps over vigorous in that defense. Maybe I was a little bit too strong in my critique of archaeology in the first season of Ancient Apocalypse. Maybe I should have been a bit gentler and a bit kinder, and I've tried to reflect that in the second season, and to bring also many more indigenous voices into the second season, as well as the voices of many more archaeologists.
Yeah, in general, I got a chance to get a glimpse of the archaeology community, and in archaeology, in science in general, I don't have much patience for this kind of arrogance or snark or dismissal of general human curiosity that I think your work inspires in people. And so that's why people like Ed Barnhart, who I recently had a conversation with, he radiates sort of kindness and curiosity as well. And it's like that kind of approach to ideas, especially about human history, it inspires people.
Exactly.
It inspires millions of people to ask questions.
Exactly.
I mean, that's why you had Keanu Reeves on the new season. He's basically coming to the show from that same perspective of curiosity.
Keanu is genuinely curious about the past and very, very interested in it, and he's bringing to it questions that everybody brings to the past. He's speaking for every man in the series.
So, given that, can you maybe steelman the case that archaeologists make about this period that we've been talking about? Can you make the case that is indeed what happened? Is it was hunter-gatherers for a long time?
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a cataclysm, a very difficult period in human history with the Younger Dryas, and that changed the environment and then led to the springing up of civilizations at different places on Earth. Mm-hmm. Can you sort of make the case for that?
Oh, no, I completely understand why that is the position of archaeology, because that's what they've found. Archaeology is very much wishing to define itself as a science. and it uses the techniques of weighing and measuring and counting are very key to what archaeology does. And in what they've found and what they've studied around the world, they don't see any traces of a lost civilization. And the idea that besides, we live in a very politically correct world today, and the idea that some kind of lost civilization brought knowledge to other cultures around the world is seen as almost racist or colonialist in some way. It triggers that aspect as well. But basically, I think majority of archaeologists are in complete good faith on this. I don't think that anybody's really seeking to frame me. I think that what we're hearing from most archaeologists, some much more vicious than others, but what we're hearing from most archaeologists is this is what we found, and we don't see evidence for a lost civilization in it. And to that, I must reply, please look at the myths. Please consider the implications of the Younger Dryas. Please look at the ancient astronomy. Please look at those ancient maps and don't just dismiss them and sneer at them. And for God's sake, please look more deeply at the parts of the world that were immensely habitable and attractive during the Ice Age and that have hardly been studied by archaeology at all, before you tell us that your theory is the only one that can possibly be correct. In fact, it's a very arrogant and silly position of archaeology, because archaeological theories are always being overthrown. It can take years. It can take decades. It took decades in the case of the Clovis First hypothesis for the settlement of the Americas. But sooner or later, a bad idea will be kicked out by a preponderance of evidence that idea does not explain.
If we can just look back at your debate with Flint Dibble on Joe Rogan Experience, what are some takeaways from that? What have you learned? Maybe what are some things you like about Flint? You said that he's one of your big critics, but what do you like about his ideas, and what were you maybe bothered by?
First of all, just very recently, and it can be found on my YouTube channel, and it's signaled on my website, I have made a video, runs about an hour, which looks at a series of statements that Flint made during the debate, which I was not prepared to answer. And it turns out that some of those statements are not correct. The notion, for example, that there were 3 million shipwrecks that have been mapped. Flint actually uses the word mapped, 3 million shipwrecks that have been mapped at one point in the debate, and I've put that clip into the video that I brought out. That is not a fact. That is an estimate, a UNESCO estimate. And actually in the small print on one of the slides that he has on the screen, you can see the word estimate, but he never expresses that word out loud. So those who are listening to the podcast rather than watching it wouldn't even have a chance to see that. And I, sitting there in the studio, didn't see that word estimate either. And I didn't know that. I thought, my God, Flint has a point here. If there have been 3 million shipwrecks found and mapped, if that's the case, the absence of any shipwreck from a lost civilization of the Ice Age is a problem. But then I discovered that it isn't 3 million shipwrecks that have been mapped. It's much, much less than that. And maybe it's 250,000. Still a large number, but most of them from the last 1,000 years. And unfortunately, what Flint didn't go into, and perhaps he should have shared with the audience, and again I go into this in the video, is that there is indisputable evidence that human beings were seafarers as much as 50 or 60,000 years ago. The peopling of Australia involved a relatively short 90 kilometers, 100-kilometer ocean voyage, but nevertheless it was an ocean voyage, and it must have involved a large enough number of people to create a permanent population that wouldn't go extinct. The settlement of Cyprus is the same thing. It was always an island, even during the Ice Age. And no ships have survived that speak to the settlement of Australia, and no ships have survived that speak to the settlement of Cyprus either. But that doesn't mean that thing didn't happen.